Hey everyone, so if you're watching this video, my laning video is coming out tomorrow, the full in-depth guide, but one thing we're going to quickly go over before then is playing these melee versus range mashups. So it's one thing that you guys seem to struggle with quite a bit. So here we're going to look at Doinb's Akali versus Scout's Orianna in a pro game. So there is a lot to learn from this, and we'll go over it, I think, pretty in-depth. The three kind of like biggest mistakes I see people make in these like melee versus range matchups is first, the wave control is pretty poor. Second, I think identifying like when you can all in is also like generally pretty poor. And I guess the last thing would just be taking too much damage in general, like for CS, and not really like realizing when your kind of windows are. But we'll kind of explain those as we go. So starting off, like Akali versus Orianna, generally if you are playing a melee champ versus a range champ, like it's not the same for all of them, but most of the time you are kind of weak in the early game, and that's because you sort of like lack your tools to all in. You know, if you think of champs like Zed, for example, isn't really a threat till level 3. Akali's not really a threat till level 6. You know, Fizz not until level 3. Aurelia until level 2. But anyway, generally you want to let the enemy push in the first couple waves. And the reason for that is if you start trying to push these first couple waves, it's going to be really easy for them to harass you kind of on cooldown. So in these sort of lanes, you really want to let at least the first two, probably first 3 waves come to you. And you just want to try pick up as much CS as you can without really taking damage. You'll see Akali has the Doran Shield, Fleet, and Resolve set up, so that gives her a lot of extra sustain to try and like weather the harass. But still, you do need to be quite careful of when you're going for CS, and it's important that you kind of use your movement to bait out spells, as you can see here. I went over that a bit more in my Showmaker laning guide, so you might want to check that out. But you can see just kind of he's trying to bait out the spell so that he can go up and kind of get the CS for free. Obviously, he can't do that every time, but if he can bait out enough of them, Orianna's going to spend quite a lot of mana, and then he won't be able to harass him anymore. And also, he's just going to be able to get like as much of the CS kind of as he can. You can see here, like he's actually managed to get all the CS, and he still remains like really high HP. So far the lane is going really well, and I think like a lot of people would say that maybe they're not being aggressive enough here, but this is really just all you can do. And actually Doinb's playing it like pretty damn well. Hasn't really taken much damage. So when you're playing these like assassin versus ranged, or just like melee versus range in general, the first couple waves, you're most likely just looking to survive until you can start kind of getting some threat. So where Akali has the wave right now, this is very good for her in the early game. The reason is obviously allows her to farm safely under tower, and Orianna can't ever like really chase with orders because there's a threat of the tower here as well. And another reason is it does make Orianna a little bit scared of ganks, although it's not the biggest deal this game because Akali has no gank set up, and Olaf's not the best ganker either. So it doesn't really apply that much in this game, but it's another thing to think about in those other games. So gonna look to just pick up all the CS here. Can start going for a little bit of harass now that Akali is level 3, but most likely still going to be looking to farm. Now, one thing that is a little bit interesting here, there's like a couple things. So first, Orianna's mana is at half. She does still have the biscuit, but in other words, you are attacking her mana bar rather than her HP bar. Like she's still full HP, but eventually your sustain is gonna still be there. Like she's gonna run out of mana before you run out of HP, which is pretty important for a lot of these melee versus range matchups. And another thing is that when the wave crashes like this, it means it's going to push out. It's going to bounce back out. And that's the most dangerous time to be playing these weak early game champions like Akali, is when this wave bounces back out. And there's a few reasons for that. Again, it's kind of like if you're like pushed all the way up to their tower, you can be easily ganked. And also, it's just going to be harder for you to get farm without taking harass for it. But if you can get to this like point in the lane being like relatively high HP, and the enemy being like pretty low mana, you should be pretty safe to push this out. Like Orianna doesn't really have the mana to kind of like force a kill onto Akali here. So Akali's probably just going to look to push out mainly. Here I'll actually show you guys something interesting. So one kind of concept that we'll be going over a bit more in the laning guide is extended trades and short trades. So depending on what type of melee champion you're playing, you might have very good short trades, champs like Akali, champs like Zed, champs like Fizz, or you might have really good extended trades, so stuff like Aurelia, Yone, Yasuo, stuff like that. So if you can play to kind of your trade's strength versus the enemy champ, it can allow you to take some favorable trades. So like in this matchup, for example, Orianna is very good at extended trades because she has low cooldowns, and she also has like empowered auto attacks. Whereas Akali is actually decent at extended trades, but she's quite good at short trades. So you can take a short trade onto Orianna, and she doesn't really have much way to kind of trade back, and you can just like get a little bit of HP advantage like that. So here, like I was saying, this is like probably the most dangerous time of the lane for Akali. The reason is that, like, yeah, the wave's pushing in. You're going to have to walk all the way up to CS this. Both sides of the river are dark, although you do have the Olaf down here. But the reason like this is sort of okay is because Orianna has used so much mana already. Kind of on harass that hasn't really meant, or hasn't really like, yeah, hasn't really done anything. So most likely, when your wave is in this situation, you really want to try to get it pushed out. You really, if you're playing the ranged champion, this is the kind of wave state that you love versus melee champions. So Akali's really going to want to get this wave in kind of as soon as possible, and not be in this situation. I think it's okay to use the W there. The reason is Olaf placed a ward. You guys can see the map. Yeah, so Olaf placed a ward down here, which means that Akali can kind of be a bit more aggressive now that she has some vision to hug too. I think, yeah, just going to want to burn spells on this wave most likely. You can hit Orianna at the same time. That's definitely good. But yeah, basically, if Akali can get through this early game without taking meaningful damage, that's like ideal. So yeah, it's like really important, guys, that in the early game of like melee versus range, for the most part, like it depends on matchup, but most of the time you will just be wanting to survive until that like key level 6. Obviously, if you're playing a champion that like spikes really hard at like really early, so like Aurelia for example, you can still play quite aggressive in the early game. She's more an exception. I think most melee champions are generally quite weak until they hit level 6 compared to ranged champions. So we've managed to get this in like without dying, and still full HP, has full sums. This is a really good spot to be in as Akali. Orianna hasn't really been able to leverage her laning advantage. And okay, here's something that's going to happen. So one thing that I kind of normally say is that when you're playing, when you're looking to roam, you want to like shove the wave before moving to a fight. But there's a few reasons why you don't really want to do that here. So the first reason is that when you're playing these like assassins and stuff, generally your wave clear is quite weak early, so it'll take you a very long time to shove this wave. But the second reason is that assassins are much better than like mages or anything like that in early skirmishes. So if you can like leave the wave like even and move to a fight that's a 2v2, it's almost a guaranteed win for you guys. Like here, Akali is just so much stronger than Orianna in this fight, so it's really easy just to come over here and take a skirmish. Essentially, like, normally ranged champions have the advantage in straight up laning, but typically melee champions have much stronger skirmishing and much stronger roaming, so you can kind of use that to your advantage. Okay, so here, Flash has been burned, but we get a pretty good base, and we're going to buy, I guess, the revolver. Yep. Okay, so this is the kind of part in the lane where Akali starts being very strong. So Akali's got her first buy, and she's also about to hit level 6, and Orianna hasn't based. So this is kind of we've kind of gone over like the importance of wave control and avoiding damage, but this is the next thing that I see people really mess up. So it's super important that you realize and like you're kind of all in. So right now, when Akali is level 6 with Revolver, if Orianna is staying in lane on half HP, like, she has to die. If you're playing a melee champion, you need to be, or an assassin or anything like that, you need to be really good at punishing the kind of range bullies when they do make mistakes, because if you just let them harass you kind of for free and like make mistakes and you don't ever punish them, they're going to play more and more aggressive, right? But if you can get to the point where you like recognize you're all in, like you can know that you can kill someone from like half HP or 80% HP or whatever, you'll be able to punish a lot, and they'll kind of like be more scared to harass you. This is really good. Akali got the kill. I think Orianna hadn't even based there. Yeah, she hadn't even based. Akali's going to try pushing this wave, and Orianna's going to TP to the tower, I'm guessing. Okay, to the creep. I forgot this was before the TP got nerfed. Okay, so Akali's going to take the base. Now, here's another kind of like interesting thing here. So another thing you kind of need to keep in mind when you play these champs that are very ult reliant is they're quite useless outside of their ult. So right now, Akali is going to be much weaker than Orianna for like the next minute. And you kind of need to play around that. So we're talking about how playing around your windows is pretty important. Akali really for the next minute just wants to keep the wave like on her side, and then can start threatening all ins again once this ult comes back up. Now, one difference that you're going to notice is that before in the early game, when the wave was up here, Orianna was harassing very heavily when the wave walked in. But now that like you have like more threat, you really need to be leveraging that threat. So like I was saying before, how just like all-inning people you know, when they get low, obviously is going to make them harass you less. We'll kind of see that example again, but without the all-in. I'll kind of show you guys what I mean. So pushing the wave, letting the wave come to her is good here. Akali doesn't have the wave clear to just nuke this wave, and the wave being on the side is generally much better because it gives you like more room to all in. Like, it's very hard to all in a full HP Orianna under her tower, but if Orianna's pushed all the way up here, like, she can definitely be threatened. The wave control is quite important. Okay, so when the wave comes up here, it'd be really good if Akali can hold this wave. Like, you could let it crash, but Orianna is very, very threatened when the wave is all the way up here. So pulling the wave here would be pretty nice. Yeah, okay, so he pulls it, and it gets frozen. So this is really, really good, really what you want to do in the kind of like melee versus range matchups. And now you'll see, this is like the real difference. So Akali here now has a lot of threat. You've got the ult, you've got the revolver, which means on every creep, like, Orianna has to be quite scared, and you'll see a very big difference now is that Orianna has to use her spells literally just to push in the wave rather than to harass you. So that means if you can be threatening on these creeps, you know, you can kind of see him like positioning forward. Orianna has to be very scared, and you'll see every spell is just used to clear the wave. And so that's like really the turning point, is Orianna now is too scared to even harass you. Like, she has to use her spells like literally just to push in the wave, because every creep Akali's kind of like walking forward on and threatening. And here, like, well, nothing really happened, I guess. Yeah, so like, I'd say Akali's like in a super good spot here. Generally, if you don't get punished, kind of like as the melee versus ranged in the early game, you do like have a much stronger kind of like mid game, I would say. Generally you get outscaled, but in the mid game, you're most of the time kind of superior. So I guess gonna look for a base here, or maybe gonna stay. Let's see. Okay, so going for base. We'll just skip this forward a bit. Okay, wait. Okay, he actually didn't go for a base. Let's see this fight here. Again, this is actually another point. So we talked about this before, how you know, if the waves are even, generally you want to push before roaming. Not really the case when you're playing melees. Your wave clear is too low. Pushes like, well, if you have good wave clear, you can do it, but if you don't, it's better to just walk to these fights, because generally you're going to be much more useful than ranged champions in these skirmishes. And this is something that Orianna really doesn't want versus an Akali in the early game, because it's like playing to Akali's strength and not really to Orianna's. Let's see how this fight goes. Massive rel ult. Okay, this fight just looks super over. Holy shit, that was a pretty nice fight though. Okay, well, let's see, is there anything more? Actually, yeah, there's probably one other thing. So, as I was saying before, when you're playing these like melee assassins, you really want the wave like on your side, right? You want to be threatening them. But this kind of changes as soon as you actually like reach the required wave clear to where you can start pressuring the map. So for Akali, when Akali hits like level 9 and can start actually clearing waves at a reasonable pace, then you don't really want to freeze the wave anymore. You're kind of just like freezing the wave in the early game because it's the most pressuring thing you can do when you have low wave clear. But once you do have like a decent amount of wave clear, you can just look to spam one-shot mid waves and just like move around the map and kind of like threaten bot lane, threaten the jungle. So I think you'll probably see here when Akali hits level 9 that she's going to just like start blowing up the wave. But until that point, still going to let the wave just come to her. Going to come pick up this blue buff. Also, pushing the wave when you don't have ult is a little bit risky in case Orianna does contest you. Oh, that's sad. He didn't get the blue. Fuck a G. It's fine, I guess. Okay, so I think now Akali's level 9. That's quite a bit of wave clear. Orianna's not here, so it makes sense to push anyway. But I think if we just watch for a bit more, we'll likely see Akali will just spam push waves here. So you can see like Akali pushes like pretty quickly now. You know, it's not like the early game where you have to spend like a full minute, not a full minute, like 15 seconds clearing the wave. And that gives you a lot of time, as we've kind of like talked about before, to come down here and just like, you know, threaten the jungle, make the enemy bot lane leave their tower and stuff like that. Again, like Orianna now is not really strong enough to contest Akali for these waves. So you don't need to be scared, you don't need to be pulling the wave anymore. You can just come here, it takes like 5 seconds to clear the wave, and then you can use that time for basically whatever you want, for farming, for, you know, pressuring the map, anything like that. I think that's kind of it, guys. To summarize, like these melee versus range matchups, your wave control is probably the most important, especially in the early game. And also like recognizing what windows you can be aggressive, you know, whether that's like levels, whether that's like various cooldowns, like you have ult, for example, compared to like not having ult. Yeah, so I'd say those are probably the biggest things, and I guess just like avoiding damage in the early game in general is very important. Like, you can give up CS in the early game, to make sure you hit that like level 6 mark, or level 3 or whatever it is in your matchup, without being too far behind. And then yeah, when you do get to that like point where you're really strong wave clear, you can just like look to push the wave and pressure the whole map like that. So guys, I think that was it for this one. A reminder, my laning guys is coming tomorrow. I won't let you guys, or I won't make you guys rather, wait any longer for that. I know it's been a while, but hopefully it'll be something that can be helpful for you guys. If you haven't watched my other laning videos, I would recommend watching them. I think there's good stuff in each of them. But anyway, other than that, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.